They say behind every empire lies a secret, and behind every love story a shadow. But what happens when the wealthiest man alive pens his legacy beside a woman the world never expected? This isn't just romance, it's calculation, it's power, it's survival. Tonight, we step into the hidden saga of Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez. A tale carved in silence, wrapped in diamonds, and tested on the decks of billion-dollar yachts inside the marble halls of a Venetian palace. Champagne echoed in crystal gowns, whispered against stone, and violins filled the night as guests believed they were witnessing love's greatest triumph. But somewhere among them, a man in an expensive suit, neither an official photographer nor the paparazzi lurking outside on gondolas, lifted his camera. The shot he captured seemed harmless. Lauren Sanchez laughing with the wife of a tech titan, their heads close as though sharing casual words. To anyone else, it was joy. But that photograph would one day ignite a storm later described by experts as the most brutal billionaire divorce in history. What looked like happiness became evidence of betrayal. 3 whispered words from that night would activate the most devastating clause ever hidden in a marriage contract, a clause now studied by legal scholars as a masterpiece of destruction. 3 words that turned a wedding into a battlefield and a love story into a war. The world saw Bezos and Sanchez as a fairy tale, a union of love and influence. Venice, chosen for its beauty, became a theater of unimaginable wealth. Chandeliers worth millions glittered above canals. Custom gowns stitched over months shimmered in candlelight. Roses flown from Ecuador lined the halls, and a Grammy-winning conductor led an orchestra for guests who embodied the heights of global power. Every detail was flawless, but perfection was only the mask. But beneath the glitter and music, another narrative was quietly unfolding because Jeff Bezos never moves without a plan. And this wedding was not a destination. It was the opening move of a strategy invisible to those clinking glasses around him. Every smile, every glance, every whispered word was being tracked. Hidden among servers and musicians were not just staff, but investigators. Their mission wasn't hospitality, it was surveillance. Conversations were captured, photos archived, every detail preserved for future use. To Bezos, affection was never the foundation. Power was, and this wedding was less a celebration than a trap disguised as love. Those closest to him recalled his eerie calm. He wasn't a groom lost in joy. He was a strategist several moves ahead while his new bride was still admiring the board. Even the prenuptial contract was no ordinary document. It took nearly 18 months, drafted by multiple firms working in isolation, so no one could grasp the whole picture. By the end, it spanned almost 900 pages, so dense it needed its own index, so meticulous it mapped out nearly every scenario of married life. One lawyer, who later studied portions of it, called it the Mona Lisa of financial warfare. Within those pages lay the seeds of collapse, 7 lethal clauses each, crafted with precision, each capable of stripping Lauren not just of wealth, but of influence, access, and even her voice. The most ruthless among them was nicknamed the 5 billion boomerang clause. So delicately worded, it could be triggered by something as small as a social media post or a casual magazine quote. If her words implied she was leveraging the marriage for personal gain, the consequence was financial annihilation. Experts say this single clause took months to engineer, with psychologists and attorneys predicting every possible way she might cross the line. Then came the second, the silence protocol, a clause that sealed her story. She could never publish a memoir, grant an interview, or film a document awry unless Bezos gave his written consent. Breaking the rules didn't just mean losing financial rights, it meant punishments so crushing they could reduce her to bankruptcy. The third clause was the image trap, banning her from using her role as the wife of the world's richest man to build influence. Every photograph, every appearance, every endorsement could be twisted into evidence against her. The language was so deliberately vague that even standing on stage at a charity gala might be counted as exploitation of her status. The fourth clause, the circle of isolation, severed her from anyone deemed a rival to Bezos. But the definition of rival was left dangerously open-ended. It could mean a direct competitor, or simply anyone who might one day challenge his empire. The fifth, the political muzzle, erased her voice from the public sphere. She could never fundraise, never advocate, never support a cause, because in Bezos's world, politics was too dangerous a battlefield to allow his wife to enter. The sixth, the inheritance void, ensured that nothing, not assets, not property, not even heirlooms, could pass to her without the approval of a board made up entirely of Bezos loyalists. And then came the most chilling of all, the cascade provision. If she broke even a single clause, every other clause would activate instantly, unleashing a chain reaction designed to leave her with absolutely nothing. As one attorney later admitted, he had seen corporate mergers with fewer restrictions. This was never a marriage contract. It was a weapon camouflaged as devotion. But the cruelest twist wasn't its existence, it was how it was enforced. Lauren wasn't just expected to follow impossible rules. She was being maneuvered into breaking them. Temptations arrived in carefully crafted packages. A luxury skincare deal legitimate on the surface hid ties to one of Bezos' rivals. Signing it would have detonated multiple clauses at once. Invitations to women's empowerment conferences seemed tailored to her passions, yet each one was a disguised trap designed to breach the political muzzle. Even journalists played their part, flattering her with interview requests about her projects, her values, her dreams, while teams of attorneys dissected every word, hunting for the faintest suggestion of a violation. For nearly a year, Lauren lived in what outsiders called paradise. But in truth, it was a paradise built inside glass walls where every step was watched, and every smile could be her undoing. Her calls were tapped, her emails screened, her posts dissected. Even those closest to her, trainers, stylists, assistants, and house staff, were bound by contracts that turned them into informants feeding a quiet surveillance machine. Lauren thought she was building a brand, stepping into the role of a global philanthropist. In reality, she was walking deeper into a case file. Every smile was logged, every handshake cataloged, every caption flagged pieces of evidence stored for a reckoning that had already been scripted. The show didn't end when the yacht parties faded. It shifted into its next act. Bezos had transformed the stage from public romance to silent control. And Lauren began to realize that the story couldn't be left in the hands of tabloids. It had to be shaped by her if she wanted her place cemented, if she wanted her children tied to a dynasty that wasn't truly theirs. To the media, it looked like glamour, diamond rings, couture gowns, yachts worth billions. What they didn't see was how Lauren turned each photograph into proof of permanence, each appearance into a claim that she wasn't a guest in this empire, she was part of its foundation. Her smile resembled a queen's not yet crowned, but already rehearsing for the throne. Jeff watched it all, knowing his empire was steel without softness, and she was the image that could humanize him. Yet behind those glittering photos lay silence. Silence where friends once joked freely. Silence where partners once spoke unguarded. Those in their orbit quickly learned that words were dangerous currency. Spoken carelessly, they could be weaponized. Bezos had witnessed it in Amazon's corridors, in Washington's backrooms, in the markets, where a whisper could erase billions. Lauren knew it from Hollywood, where a rumor could end a career overnight. Together, they built their fortress not of stone, but of fear and silence. Friends who once came every weekend stopped, not because doors were closed, but because the atmosphere was too heavy. Conversations felt like transactions, each sentence weighed like money on a ledger, each word balanced like an account that could collapse with a single misstep. And soon even family began to feel the chill. Some whispered that Lauren was to blame, others that Jeff had pulled away. The truth was far sharper. Their union, built on the knowledge of media's power, had created a fortress where honesty wasn't spoken, it was engineered. And that engineering was meticulous. Lauren's interviews painted her as warm, maternal, approachable, but their timing was no coincidence. Whenever headlines questioned her place beside Jeff, a glowing profile appeared days later. To the public, it looked like fate. In reality, it was strategy. Lauren had learned long ago, you don't wait for storms to pass, you redirect them to fill your sails. Jeff respected this. It was the same principle he had wielded in boardrooms. But respect didn't dissolve tension. And tension only grew in a relationship where one partner commanded the fortune and the other commanded the spotlight. Jeff's world was built on spreadsheets, precision, outcomes that could be measured. Lauren thrived in the unpredictable, and emotion in moments that couldn't be quantified. When those worlds collided, the result wasn't always harmony. Sometimes it was unseen fireworks. Sometimes it was silences that lasted for days. The public was never allowed a glimpse. They were shown yachts, galas, carpets of red, as though no crack existed beneath the polish. But inside circles whispered. They whispered that Lauren wanted more than proximity, she wanted parity. And they whispered that Jeff resisted not because he doubted her worth, but because he feared losing the one thing he valued above all: control. Those whispers thickened into stories, and stories darkened into shadows that followed the couple everywhere. The shadows deepened when Jeff began shifting his fortune into foundations, when he spoke of climate change and global initiatives. These were not simple acts of generosity. They were power place moves that extended his influence beyond commerce, into politics, into ideology, into the future itself. And Lauren understood that every step Jeff took onto that world stage would also cast a light or a shadow onto her. She refused to remain a background figure. She needed to be written into the script, not as a supporting role, but as a lead. So Lauren began stepping into the light not only as Jeff's partner, but as a voice of her own. She spoke about women in aviation, about charity, about causes that carried her name. And slowly, the press began to notice. The headline didn't just read Bezos and Sanchez. It began to read Lauren Sanchez. For some, it was inspiring. For others, unsettling. Because the boundary between power couple and power struggle is thinner than anyone dares admit. As her transformation unfolded, Jeff responded the way billionaires do not with confrontation, but with adaptation. He shifted the ground beneath her feet quietly, sometimes through lavish gifts, sometimes through silence, sometimes through carefully timed moves. Always with the reminder that this was no longer a romance, it was an empire. And empires demand control. The silent contest between control and belonging escalated when Jeff and Lauren entered arenas that transcended business and media. Their dinners now drew heads of state foundation leaders, tech visionaries, even discreet royals who measured influence not in dollars but in centuries. In these rooms, Lauren walked like a tightrope artist. Every smile mattered, every sentence carried weight. One wrong note could brand her an accessory instead of a partner. But Hollywood had trained her well. Rooms where producers could end careers with a glance had taught her how to smile without fear, speak without overstepping, and draw attention without forcing it. Now those skills sharpened into weapons. Because every woman who had ever stood beside a billionaire had faced the same choice: vanish into silence or carve her name into history. Lauren had no intention of being erased. And Jeff watched, calculating. He knew these gatherings were perilous alliances whispered across candlelit tables could unravel empires built over decades. He also knew that Lauren's ambition was no longer hidden. Her presence had shifted. She was not content to simply stand beside him anymore. She wanted her own seat at the table. And perhaps in some quiet way, Jeff respected that. But another part of him feared it, because in the billionaire world, ambition is never free. The tabloids painted their romance as endless luxury, as if diamonds erased every argument and yachts drowned every doubt. But those who looked closer knew the truth. Luxury doesn't erase tension. It buries it beneath silk curtains and polished marble. And Jeff and Lauren were no exception. When the cameras vanished harder, questions filled the air, questions about loyalty, about legacy, about family. Questions about what it really meant to belong in a world where wealth could buy everything but peace and legacy cast the heaviest shadow of all. Jeff had children. Lauren had children. Together, they were building a blended family the media rarely acknowledged. Yet behind closed doors, those children were the future of everything. Lauren understood that if she didn't secure their place now, they would forever be treated as outsiders in a dynasty carved from Jeff's billions. And Jeff understood that if he gave too much too fast, the empire he had forged from fire and steel could splinter in front of him. So every choice carried double meaning. A new home wasn't real estate, it was a signal of permanence. An engagement wasn't romance, it was the declaration of a dynasty. A project launch wasn't business, it was proof their union had direction. And the world studied each move, dissected each smile, hunting for signs of unity or collapse. But the most dangerous battlefield wasn't the yachts or the red carpets. It was the silence. The silence of private rooms where voices sharpened, where eyes hardened, where power revealed its rawest form. Lauren was unafraid to remind Jeff that love without recognition was hollow. And Jeff was unafraid to remind Lauren that recognition without discipline could destroy them both. It was in those silences that choices were made, choices that would shape the future of two people whose influence stretched farther than the borders of nations. The press, meanwhile, remained insatiable. They asked the same questions again and again. Who held the reins? Was Lauren the architect or was Jeff the captive? Was it true love or calculated theater? And with every article, every headline, every rumor, the polished image they worked so hard to protect was chipped away. Still, Lauren did not flinch. She leaned into the storm wearing criticism like armor. She had survived worse: Hollywood betrayals, broken marriages, scars that nearly erased her once before. Jeff admired that endurance because he too had learned in business that survival is not reserved for the pure, it belongs to the relentless. Yet admiration did not erase friction, and friction only sharpened when Lauren's voice expanded, beyond philanthropy, into leadership, into vision, into roles that once belonged solely to Jeff. Insiders whispered again that she wanted projects of her own, that she wanted a platform. No one could strip from her something that would outlast the label of Bezos' partner. For some, this was dangerous. Because when two visions collide, one must surrender or both collapse. But collapse was not an option for Jeff. His empire sprawled too vast, its stakes too high to risk fracture. And collapse was not an option for Lauren, who had fought too long to ever be erased again. So instead, they chose something else: negotiation. Unspoken, constant negotiation that shifted like tides. Some weeks, Lauren claimed victory, her name glowing across headlines. Some weeks, Jeff reclaimed control using silence to suffocate whispers. Together, they built not harmony but equilibrium. A fragile balance that kept the empire standing even as its foundation trembled. At this stage, the story of Jeff and Lauren was no longer about falling in love. It was about surviving love, surviving it under the crushing weight of billions, surviving it beneath the watch of a world eager to see them both rise and fall. And perhaps that was why the connection endured. Because for both, the only thing more unbearable than the storm was facing it alone. Because apart, they would still hold power. But together, they carried something far greater: a story. And story is what transforms power into legend. In the end, the tale of Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez was never truly about yachts, diamonds, or luxury. It was about control and belonging. About how two people from different worlds stepped into the same storm of scrutiny and tried to protect not just their love, but their own power. Jeff with his empire built from billions. Lauren with her resilience and her refusal to be erased. Together, they became a symbol of what happens when love is tested. Not by distance or struggle, but by wealth, fame, and the relentless spotlight of a world that never stops demanding more. Their story is not finished. It will continue to unfold in boardrooms, on red carpets, and global foundations, and perhaps one day in the pages of history. But already one truth is clear: even the richest man on earth cannot escape the weight of legacy. And even the strongest woman beside him cannot escape the test of belonging. Their empire stands, but like all empires, it is fragile. Its survival depends not only on wealth, but on the choices they make together. So the conclusion is unmistakable: Jeff and Lauren are not merely living a romance. They are writing a legend. And whether history remembers that legend as a tale of power or a tale of love, only time will decide. For now, the world keeps watching, because in the theater of wealth, power, and desire, the curtain never falls. And if you want to keep uncovering unique, untold stories of power, love, and legacy, don't forget to subscribe to Starbuzz for more videos like this.